back to our Talking Aged Care podcast with Dr. Kaushik Sridhar. Thank you, Kaushik, for being on the podcast. For those of you who don't know Kaushik, we had the pleasure of working together at a AS6 company, Regis, many years ago. I had much more hair than Kaushik, and it wasn't great. But we spent the time working together previously. And in this episode, we're going to uncover everything ESG, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, your understanding. You have a very illustrious career. You've done keynotes globally. You're a TEDx speaker. You're also a best-selling author. Congrats. Thank you for being in this episode, and really keen for you to get started and introduce yourself to our viewers.
No, thank you, Mark. I'm very excited. And yes, we connected, I think almost half a decade ago. And kindred spirits, we always kept in touch. And I think you're a great human. So I'm really
Wow,
grateful to be a part of this podcast. And I'm looking forward to having hopefully a robust ESG related conversation with you.
that's right. No, thank you, Josh. I think before we jump into the subject of ESG and sustainability,
Sure.
I'm really keen to hear what brought you into the field of aged care. But before that, correct me if I'm wrong, you were pursuing a career as a professional tennis player right before this all started, right?
I was, Mark. Yes. So Um, just a very brief, kind of introduction about myself. So people always say, where are you from? And I always say I'm Indian by blood, Nigerian by heart, American by outlook, and Australian by passport or paperwork. That's kind of my upbringing, and it's something I'm very grateful for because not many people get to have that global experience. And if you do, I think you absolutely, should harness and leverage it as much as you can for the greater good. So my first career was I was a professional tennis player. Started playing at the age of 6 by accident with my dad and his doubles teams. Ended up moving to the United States to pursue a professional tennis career. So I played around the world, played on the tour. Um, I think I got a ranking of 900, which is not very good, and I was never that good. So that's why I ended up in sustainability and ESG now.
You got a
Um,
ranking. You got a ranking, so that is good.
got a ranking.
That's right.
900 is great. So how I got into sustainability, I it was not on my radar until the age of 22. I'd say 21, 22. I came to Australia as a tennis coach with Margaret Court. So really, tennis was my thing. But in my first job as a tennis coach, what I quickly learned was stakeholder engagement and communication. And trying to get people to align. People of different ages, different communication styles, different egos, different needs, getting them to align on a common vision and a common purpose, which I never realized is quite translatable in the sustainability world. My passion for tennis was extinguished around that time. I think I just, due to some
That
childhood things,
chapter was gone. What was that like? Where you? I guess the ability is still there, but you just that passion's gone, right?
gone. I went
I,
through
I,
some,
I like it with cricket, Kaushik. Yeah, I used to play, semi-professional
yeah,
cricket. So I played,
right.
I
And
played
what
with.
happened there?
So I sound like a bit bitter when I say this, but I was 18. The highest I got to was the centre of England, and the selector said if I performed well, you would have
Yeah,
gone to play England under 19s. But I broke my wrist, and the rest is history. But everything happens for a reason, right? So I believe it was a really good chapter. Some of my friends that have played for England when they used to come over for the Ashes, we would
yeah.
catch up and talk about the good old days. But I think what you said there, the passion's gone. Like I played last year thinking the passion would be there, but I just wanted to be at home with my wife and kids. The passion's not there.
Love it.
So
No,
yeah,
you struck a chord, man. I think as athletes, there's limits to growth in that space, and also, your mindset shifts once you exceed a certain stage and a certain level. So for me, obviously, it was more from a childhood issue that I had in America that led to my desire for tennis to be dead. But that's a different podcast, I think. But I think for sustainability, uh, how I got into it was through an internship when I was doing my MBA in Macquarie University in Sydney. And I actually
yes,
turned that internship down 3 times because I didn't really understand what sustainability was. And I was like,
okay.
how do you how do you make a living and a career out of trying to do good and saving the world? Because at the time it wasn't that mainstream, this sustainability world, ESG world. It was around, but it wasn't big like it is today. I did have a bit of slight passion for the topic because I traveled a lot with tennis. I went to the developed and the developing world. I saw many different environmental and social challenges. Obviously, some of the countries that I listed earlier, they've got their issues. And so when I got into my first sustainability role, I felt that there was a significant opportunity to have a bigger impact and to potentially contribute to solving some of these pressing issues. So that's, Mark, in conclusion, that was really kind of what got me more into sustainability. It was really that belief that I could drive some meaningful change. Yeah.
And that's great. I think thanks for I guess this raw kind of interpretation of your journey. It's important. I think sometimes, honestly, and that's why I really appreciate value on the podcast. And you know, this is a true account of your I guess experiences. And like you said, sustainability wasn't talked about back then. It was like this buzzword, like, oh, it's cool. We're doing sustainability. It's almost like when you see some organizations with their corporate social responsibility, and like they might be the most toxic employers with the highest rate of employees leaving and resigning, but then on, I don't know, aged care employee day or are you okay day, they'll have a few cakes and balloons. That's nonsense. Like, it's so disingenuous. So it's great to have an understanding in terms of what you've done and how you got into the sector. And I think in terms of your vocation, in terms of your studies, did that align to sort of bring you into ESG in terms of?
My bachelor's, Mark, was in business and graphic design. So it was a double major, had nothing to do with sustainability. And it was my MBA was on strategic finance. So it was during that MBA that internship opportunity came up. So it was only my PhD, I would say, that really aligned with sustainability and ESG. But the foundational education that I did in America, actually, it was very liberal arts. I studied theater, I studied photography, I did random things. I did everything but business, and then moved into a degree in business. So one of the I think opportunities for young people is that education and the type of education you get. For me, studying religion, studying English literature, studying watercolor, studying photography, public speaking, theater. This was my first year in my bachelor's, and I think if I had not studied those kind of diverse courses, it would it'll be hard to really have a great professional career and also a personal career in terms of the way the world is shifting and how society is changing, to be adaptable, to be nimble, to be resilient. That's the sort of foundation that I really appreciate having as part of my education toolkit.
No, thanks, Question. I think it's like really great to hear in terms of your background and where you grew up in Nigeria and the Indian heritage and also America, and like how you sort of synthesize that. And I think it's such a fortunate upbringing that you've had, because I think we only know what we know, right? So, um,
That's right.
like me, right? I guess I was born and brought up in the UK, but
Yeah,
my dad's Sri Lankan, mum's West Indian. That's why cricket was the sport for me growing up. But I think
great cricket combination there.
yeah, that's right. That's right. It was the only sport, so I was sort of forced into it. But no, I wasn't. I loved it. But I think it's important, and also in terms of the aged care sector that we work in, and you would know this as
Yeah,
well, that the majority of our sector, the workforce, is made up of the migrant population.
that's right.
So we have Nepalese, Indian, Filipino, Sri Lankan, to name a few,
That's right.
and it's important that we have that understanding so that we're not creating a social issue about
That's
integrating different nationalities within an organization.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you, Mark. And that's one of the reasons I loved working in the aged care sector. It was brief. It wasn't. It was like 3 years or so. But when I came into the aged care sector from the professional services industry, I always had a respect for the elderly people, and a recognition also that that sector was a little bit behind on sustainability. Because if you think about it, the organization you mentioned where we met, Regis, there's aged care facilities in general are significant energy consumers. So I think that I saw an opportunity to improve the environmental footprint of this organization, which obviously has positive commercial implications, but also seeing how we can use sustainability as a vehicle to enhance the quality of life for residents and the diverse staff as well. So the knowledge that I had from the studies and from my previous work experiences, the pragmatic passion that I had for sustainability, I think the intersection in the aged care sector, it worked really, really well for me, and that's why I enjoyed my time there.
No, that's great. And you made a good point. I think obviously Regis being an ASX listed organisation, there is a commercial focus, but aged care operators in general, whether they're non-for-profit or for-profit, you need to be commercially uh, minded so that you can continue. But I think in terms of, and this is always a question that I ask, and I think to myself, because we've all been in those situations where sometimes um, you need to lower your ego. And what I mean by that is sometimes you go into a boardroom and it's even hard to get your presentation deck across the room because there are big egos in the room. And sometimes those ego people's heads can't fit in the room, at that point when you're trying to talk and correlate. And I think sometimes uh, you want to obviously, for the better good, advance the organization. But I think it makes it harder when you have to sometimes, I'm not saying from the company you work at, just in general, you may have to alter the way that you present something according to, I guess, the audience. That being said, how did you effectively embed sustainability and get buy-in from key decision makers who probably didn't know much about ESG?
Yeah, sure. And spot on in some of your reflections there, Mark. I think whether it's sustainability or any other subject matter for that matter, uh, it requires it's a combination of a strategic and a tactical approach. Yesterday, I was, talking to a client in another jurisdiction in Asia and talking about hydrogen and how to get policymakers more buying into the technology and creating incentives, etc. And the tactical approach was missing from some very senior people in this organization. So we kind of worked together on how we provide a business case, but also have your key allies around you to share the load of that business case. Because if you go in alone fighting, it's pretty much a lost cause, I think, for anything, unless the numbers are just absolutely amazing. Um, in my experience, Mark, it's the tangible benefits of sustainability. It's generally what we start off with, where we can, cost savings, payback. Uh, but it's not just about that. 80% of a company's valuation is intangible and 20% is tangible, according to a lot of research out there. And if there was one lever or vehicle to use to enhance reputation, enhance your social license to operate, ESG or sustainability is one of those things. From an aged care point of view, obviously, resident well-being and sustainability go quite well hand in hand. So I think for me, the board and the executives is really engaging my key decision makers very, very early and presenting where possible kind of that data-driven evidence. That's really important. Um, the organization where we met, we started at a base and we kind of had to slowly, incrementally build on it. So that culture of sustainability takes time. It might take 3 years, it might take 5 years to have it fully embedded in a business, but you can't do it alone, and you've got to engage. You have to educate. You have to try and create sustainability champions, and you've got to set smart goals and KPIs that you can measure yourself and the portfolio against. The last thing I would say from a governance point of view is ensuring that there is a voice from the top, a tone from the top, and also potentially if there is that bandwidth to have a subcommittee from a board perspective that dedicates itself to ESG and risk. So I think those are kind of the different elements of how to try and really push this with key decision makers. So it gets fully stuck and embedded and makes a role like mine redundant after 3 to 5 years.
No, that's right. You made a really good point there that I wanted to expand upon, and that was that you need to have the right tone of voice set from the top, right?
Yeah.
And it can't be a tick in the box because we know, as we know this very well, that there are some organisations, and they'll say, we're aiming to reduce our carbon footprint, and for a meeting they'll print 20 pages of A3 paper as an example, which will then go in the book straight away afterwards because of confidential, resident information, or they've got older buildings and their assets are older where they don't want to look to change because the cost of change, they look at that ROI perspective. And yes, that's important, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, we're going to put solar everywhere and make it, easy, but the purpose is, for the future. I think a lot of aged care providers, Boschik, and it's interesting, a lot of aged care providers who thought they were profitable providers, and the smaller ones, didn't account for depreciation. So it was a false sense of economy, thinking that they're in the black, but actually it didn't account for depreciation. But also, they didn't, like you said, have that tactical side or input to allow for renovations, refurbishments in a way
Mm.
that's going to move and change the landscape. So I think um, it's interesting what you said there, and about that education perspective. Did you find that you had to tread quite sort of gently initially to get that sort of educate in a way?
Uh, yes, I definitely. It depends on the organization, and the culture, and how progressive they are, and their understanding of sustainability and or ESG. In some organizations, the first thing I do is set up a stakeholder map, Mark, and kind of map out the key people that I need to work with, need to influence. Because if it's a company of 2,000 people, you don't join a company to necessarily make friends. You're there to make an impact and get things done. So from my stakeholder map, it's about, okay, this is the organization, this is the boundary. So who are the 10 to 20 people that I've really got to try and work on, influence, and see if we can get some momentum going behind this. So in that situation, if an organization doesn't even know what sustainability means or can't even spell it, you've got to tread very, very carefully, because sustainability is quite an existential term. And everything has two sides of the coin, which I agree with as well, for any concept that is. And so it's about having that healthy debate. And so if you go in all guns blazing, full passion, throwing some panels here and there, and not fully understanding the business context or the stakeholder landscape, it's pretty much finished, right? So in some organizations where we're just starting the program, you tread carefully and you sequence your steps one at a time. But in some organizations that I work for that are more progressive, more have targets, have initiatives already in place, there you're not really treading carefully, but you're more just thinking, how can we get them to that innovation, that next level in that 5 phase model of sustainability, from compliance to being amazing like Unilever was many years ago. So yeah,
Was
sometimes I have to tread carefully, Mark.
was it challenging when you entered an organisation when it had an existing strategic plan and they were quite sort of um, stubborn to sort of stick to that strategic plan, and you obviously wanted to embed ESG into that? Was that difficult?
To embed ESG in a strategic plan
That's already in place. Yeah, that's already in
that's already
situ.
in place, absolutely. It's tough. It's tough. That's when you think about the mission of the organization, the vision of the organization, the purpose of the organization, what are its values? Because governance is ESG, right? So it's environment, social, and governance. And I always say governance is the forgotten child, but governance is probably the most important thing that can make or break an organization in terms of the architecture, and what's kind of keeping the business going. So when you think about those kind of values, the ethical compass, moral compass, you start reading all of that. Recently, I've just started working with another client, having a look at their strategic plan, and one of the first questions I asked at the kickoff meeting is, you know, ha- have you got the word sustainability in your strategic plan? And then the next question was, where did the push for ESG come from? Is it coming from the chair? Is it coming from the CEO? Is it coming from the young people like the Gen Zs and the millennials? So it's not hard to retrofit sustainability into an existing strategic plan, but that's when you start becoming more tactical and little less strategic. It's like politics, and it's like moving chess pieces. That's what sustainability is. I think when you want to have a career in sustainability, understanding the subject matter is the easy part. But you're actually not a sustainability SME to do well in SME. You've got to understand politics, maneuvering. You're a politician. You're kind of an athlete, because you've got to be really resilient and be able to
That's
take
all
certain
right.
bullets,
Yeah.
and so many other things. So yeah, it's like a big game.
It is. It's sort of
And it's
very
fun.
it's a challenging game of chess, but it's a good game, right?
Yeah,
I
it's for the
think
greater good, so it's worth it.
correct, correct. And in terms of when you were mentioning about the stakeholder map and mapping out the key individuals in the organisation that you would be getting that buy and working with, were your sort of coffee friends people like the chief risk officer, head of property? Because I think, like you mentioned there, that there are straight lines there with the chief risk officer, and often there are some assets that we within holdings, because there's three arms to the organisation, being recruitment, advisory, and education. I'm a part of the recruitment. But from the advisory perspective, there's been some organisations that we've supported that they would be better off almost knock down and rebuild. It's so old. The infrastructure, with, when we did the feasibility studies, there's asbestos quite far down. Obviously, it's sealed and appropriate for residents to reside, but it's not something which would then have a shelf life of 20 more years. So I think, from that perspective, yeah, that what you mentioned is such an important point about having that key stakeholder engagement.
Mm.
Um, the question I wanted to ask you is: are providers taking ESG seriously, or is it just a tick in the box?
So this is aged care providers. So the approach to ESG, Mark, varies, I would say, among providers. Obviously, some are listed, some are private, some are for profit, some are not for profit. So ESG's value proposition is still being understood by any organization anywhere around the world in its full extent. So I'd say the approach varies. There are some genuine commitment uh, to actually integrating ESG principles into operations. There are some providers that may see it and do see it more as a compliance requirement. And as you know, from a reporting point of view, it's about to heat up in that space for organizations in any industry. But I'd also have to say, glass half full, the trend does feel like it's shifting towards greater seriousness. And I mean that seriousness. I don't mean that it necessarily means it's being done well or being taken wholeheartedly, but you think about the regulatory pressures, stakeholder expectations.
Correct.
It's starting to really companies cannot hide anymore, whether they like it or not. But also there's a recognition from a lot of CEOs that I've seen, not necessarily from aged care, sorry, but more broadly from a lot of surveys I've seen recently, is that ESG's recognition on how it links to long-term value creation and resilience and cost of capital and other metrics that's more easily understood by the powers that be. That correlation is starting to be more easily understood by more and more senior leaders. So I think that we're definitely on the right track. Um, yeah, but it varies.
Well, that's good. Thanks. I guess it's good that the curve is trending upwards and it's positive, and also it's very poignant what you just said there. So just because certain providers are taking it seriously doesn't mean they're doing it well. And again, I think gone are the days where people can hide behind their website and just have a certain day where they're going to do something, but they're actually, like you mentioned, and rightfully so. There's regulatory pressures to ensure that you're doing what is right.
That's
There are
right.
regulatory pressures to ensure that your energy consumption for large organisations are within certain ranges. And I mean, this question, and it's talked about a lot, right? But this question here, in terms of carbon footprint.
Hmm.
Can aged care providers reduce their carbon footprint to zero? Is that possible?
Uh, yes, it depends on the definition of zero, because you have carbon neutral
Yes.
and you also have net zero, which are two different things. Uh, so it is achievable. It's challenging, net zero, but it's definitely an achievable goal. So net zero is kind of the talk of the town. It's more
Yes.
about doing and then
Correct.
offsetting right at the end. Whereas carbon neutral, you can just offset. And net zero, you have to think about your supply chain and customer emissions as well. Whereas with carbon neutral, you can just think about your operational emissions, and that's plenty. So I think to get to that zero goal, Mark, I would say possible with a really comprehensive strategy. You got to have your energy efficiency measures. You got to think about transitioning to renewable energy. Renewable energy. So generally, scope. So you have three types of emissions: scope one, scope two, scope three. Scope one is your operational emissions, on-site, diesel, whatever you use. Um, Scope two is your electricity that powers your aged care homes. And then scope three and your offices. And scope three is your supply chain, value chain. It can be resident emissions if you're retirement living, but generally it's more about your supplier emissions in scope three. So scope three, like decarbonizing supplier emissions is really hard, right? If you have 1,000 suppliers, some big,
Correct.
some small, how do you get them to decarbonize? So that's where the last resort in the net zero plan is you offset any residual emissions that you simply cannot get to zero. Uh, there are solutions, like green building designs when you build your aged care home. So you kind of start with almost like a positive tone. Sustainable procurement practices is something I work quite a bit with the aged care company that I work for and some other organizations as well. You sit with your head of procurement, basically say, let's map out our supply chain. Let's see what's emissions intensive, what's not, and then see, how can we procure products that are more environmentally friendly, etc. Obviously, from a procurement point of view, you're thinking about value for money, you're thinking about cost, quality of product, etc. So there's multiple metrics to put in as part of your valuation. And the last thing I would say to get to zero is collaboration. Um, there's so many stakeholders that can benefit from your aged care home going zero. It's not just you, it's not just your residents, it's not just your executives, but it's also regulators, governments, industry associations, and others. It's an ecosystem there. So I think if you can collaborate with them, talk about your ambition, your plans, and see how you can work together more, and then all internally continuously monitoring and presenting and sharing your progress. Uh, all of this combined, Mark, can absolutely get an aged care provider to net zero.
Thanks, thanks, Josh. In terms of scope one, and I think back to the times I was in FM, we had backup generators, and obviously they're crucial because beds,
Yeah.
etc., electricity, and people who are vision impaired. But they were diesel to run. So, in terms of a sustainability perspective, can generators be sustainable? How could that be possible? Does that make sense?
Uh, Yeah, absolutely. Generators can be sustainable. Sorry, I just reflected in Nigeria, we lived off diesel generators because we didn't have electricity for 20 out of the 24 hours, and it was diesel, right? So, oh my God, I'm just thinking about my own emissions footprint as a child. Let's not even go there.
That's
But
that's why you got
emergency,
it. That's why you got into ESG. It was
yes. Can you edit my first answer and just slot this up there? That would be beautiful. I think cleaner alternatives, 100%. If you can explore cleaner alternatives, having generators powered by renewable energy sources, hybrid systems, batteries, it's an energy storage solution, can absolutely provide backup power while reducing your reliance on fossil fuels, if you want to call it that. So I think from a generator point of view, obviously diesel is one of the key inputs to powering that generator, but then you could think a little bit differently and think about microgrids and how does a battery combined replace this generator system, while ensuring that you're being renewable with your scope 1 emissions and scope 2 as well.
Great. No, thank you. That's helpful.
No, it's my
In terms of and again, it's not becoming you know a fluffy word, or it's not becoming one of those new age kind of thinking, or it's actually being embedded in the builds from before
Yep.
age facilities go for the guest development applications. Biophilic design. Your thoughts on biophilic design um, and
Yes.
benefits from stakeholders? Yeah.
Uh, oh, I love biophilic design, Mark, and nature and biodiversity more broadly as an ESG topic is the next climate change. So climate change is now, nature is tomorrow. So companies, by the way, if you're listening, just when you thought you're getting ready for climate change, there's another tsunami about to hit you in about 12 months, 12 to 18 months. So be ready for that. So from a built environment point of view, biophilic design. So when I was in one of the big four consultancies in-house, we looked at biophilic design more for our employees, natural elements into the built environment. There's so many benefits. And then when I went into aged care, even more important, right? Because you're dealing with the vulnerable. So I think the well-being of residents is a highly material ESG issue, or just a highly material issue for aged care, period. And when you have uh, when you integrate natural elements into your environment, one, it provides a more calming, I think, and a more stimulating environment. We did a pilot in the aged care company that I worked for on air quality, with RMIT University, and we kind of measured in a couple of different homes in Melbourne and another state, or it was Melbourne, to see what the air quality is like. And you know, again, biophilic design can have a positive impact on air quality,
Yeah. Wow.
stress levels, healing, as well, healing of wounds. I think for staff, it can create, as you know, it can create quite a pleasant and productive workplace, because when the staff is happy, the residents are happy, I think, and when the residents are happy, the staff are happy. So I think the two outcomes here is it does provide sustainability, provides good quality of life, and ultimately, all of this goes back to the bottom line of the business in a good way.
Correct. Thanks. That's a really eloquent way to put it. I think I look at Singapore in awe in terms of what they're doing. They seem to be years ahead in terms of the developments, their builds, inspiring. But I think you only have to go to, for example, the local train station I go to, and there's a green wall, and it
Yeah.
has all the statistics why it's reducing pollution and what it does. But just from it could be a overcast Monday and you're getting off the train. It's nice to be able to see some greenery in I guess our cities where traditionally there's a lot of concrete. Um, and I think you just mentioned the stress relief. I think biophilic design has been clinically proven in multiple peer-reviewed journals to reduce stress levels, which then reduce the need for staff to give specific medication to residents, optimize the quality of life, helps with healing of wounds, improves the air quality. It just seems a bit like a no-brainer to sort of, yeah.
Yes, it's shifting from what's the cost of it to what's the value of it.
That's right. That's right. Do you think sometimes, and you'd know this, Roshan, but do you think sometimes there needs to be, yes, you need to balance that commercial acumen to have an understanding of return on investment, but the value proposition. Do you think that sometimes it's important for leaders and key decision makers to have an understanding of the value proposition without just saying, what's the payback?
Mm. Um, I don't know if the meaning of the word value, Mark, is very well understood in many businesses, right? So everyone talks about this thing called value creation. I don't know if you've heard this in your travels, but I have. And I always wonder when this stakeholder says value creation, I instantly become a little bit skeptical. Um, what value are we creating here, and how do you actually measure it? So what you can't measure, you can't manage. So in the sustainability and ESG space, absolutely I understand things need to be measured, and then you can put a value on it. But as I said earlier, the tangible and the so in the return on investment world, you have the economic and financial ROI. You've got the environmental ROI, which Puma did for its shoes like 30 years ago. And then you have the SROI, which many HK providers do, called the social return on investment. So there's many ways to actually share the value of what we're doing to our boards and executives. But it's the way we explain it and articulate it. And I think there's a lot of people working in sustainability at the moment, but I truly believe, I don't know what the sample size is, but if let's say there's 1,000 people working in sustainability in this world globally at the moment, I would say probably 100 to 200 actually understand it and know it really, really well, and the others are really just winging it. And so
Yeah.
when they're winging it, which is obviously the title of my book, sorry, I shouldn't have said that, but when you're winging it and you don't know your stuff and you've just found an opportunity to come into it, how do you expect the boards and the executives to fully buy into it? Every business case I put forward in 20 years, Mark, the success rate is 98%. Um, so when you know your stuff, whether it's something fluffy, sorry, quote unquote fluffy like ESG and sustainability that some might say, or whether it's something like very, very, like operational or financial, I think knowing your stuff is one of the inputs to talking about the value of anything. And so I would
Yeah.
say that ESG and sustainability has certainly rocketed in its importance, I think, and its awareness. But I think people maybe just like chief sustainability officers, head of sustainability, pretty much anyone, even in recruitment, everything, stop and think, what does this issue actually mean? And why is it relevant to that industry? And where is that company on its trajectory in this space? And do the board and the ELT really care about it? So depending on all those metrics, if you're a recruiter like yourself, Mark, or HR, then you're thinking about who am I going to slot in? And that's not an easy task at all because there's a lot of people out there
No,
working in
that's right.
sustainability.
Yeah, no, I agree, Christian. I think and this, during my travels, like I've been in aged care. I was born in a nursing home in the UK, so I guess aged care was sort of woven into my DNA.
Oh,
And I've always been in aged care, but I think
yeah,
unfortunately the words and the people that use the words such as fluffy and new age
yeah,
things for ESG are the ones that are very ignorant, but also the ones
yeah,
who are scared of change or scared their role might be superseded because their practices aren't um, in line with organizational values and deliverables.
spot on.
So I think Definitely it's an education perspective, and I think it's it's actually quite scary what you've mentioned in a way. And I'm not saying like that maybe day after tomorrow, but it's really important to note. You just mentioned there that obviously climate's one thing, nature is the next. We can't keep abusing the place that we live. It's like coming in every day and chipping away at the foundation of the home and thinking it will still be there in 15 years' time. It's not. So I think there needs to be some serious thought, and the right decision makers, in my perspective, need to be at the decision table when there are new builds, so it's done properly. Do it once, do it properly. And I think, and I might be biased saying this, but during my experiences in the organisations that are doing well, that have the highest employee engagement, staff satisfaction, the longest stays for their residents in their aged care facilities, retirement villages, are the ones that take ESG seriously, are the ones that adopt biophilic design. And they don't think it's some special kind of coffee they've drunk. They actually get it, they understand it, and they encourage the organization to continue in that vein. So, because as you know as well, like you could convey such a simple point to someone, but sometimes they just want pretty graphs and figures because then it's tangible for them, right?
That's right.
They can't actually grasp that. But you just explained how business interpret the tangible and intangible ways. And I think, um, I guess, a message for the industry that ESG needs to be there, whether you're a standalone provider or you're a larger provider. If you are a standalone provider, I'm sure they can reach out to you, pushing to Orca Advisory. And this isn't a
Yeah, of
paid
course.
partnership, so I don't get any commission for introducing Koshik there. But by virtue of having that plan, it's important that they're conscientious of what they need to do and how they can move forward and survive. Because we always talk about this that Australia is built upon the small and medium sized enterprises. The worrying thing in the NHS sector, in the last 18 months, there's been that many acquisitions from the bigger players taking up the smaller providers. And to me, that's not good. Um, it shows that there's obviously something lacking. And this is before the care minutes that are coming, Amanda's care minutes, maybe to the last 2 years. So I think there needs to be some consideration. But I wanted to ask you, and this, I'm mindful of time. I want to ask this question in terms of bed numbers. It's an issue. Pre-COVID, the cost of builds was significantly less, and post-COVID, they doubled. Um, but also to meet the growing needs of our baby boomers, there's simply not enough beds. So the question I wanted to ask you, Goshik, was: is there any ways that providers can be creative to solve this issue if they do have some real estate to solve the bed issue?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, Mark. I probably would say this wouldn't be my 100% area of expertise, but I'm happy to give it a shot here. And just based on my experiences, I would say providers could potentially use like flexible, use of spaces. You might have common areas, converting that and maybe into temporary accommodations during peak times. Partnerships with other facilities, community organizations can help manage the bed issue as well. I think technology has a role to play where you have remote monitoring and care that could potentially maybe reduce the need sometimes for physical beds by supporting more residents to stay in their homes longer. Obviously home care. So I think it depends on the organization. It depends on the actual issue. But that's probably the best response I can give you. It's collaboration, it's technology, and it's also being a little bit creative and innovative with the space that you have and how to make it into something else during emergency situations or peak times.
Thank you, Goshik. I appreciate that.
Yep.
And I guess in terms of a message for anyone looking to work in our fantastic industry in the aged care sector, what message would you give to people who are looking to pursue a career in ESG, um, in that environmental sustainability development, work closely with it, be alongside in procurement? What would your message be to our viewers looking to get into the sector?
We'll all be old one day.
It's true.
whether we like it or not. I mean, those of us who are lucky enough to live a very long life, we will be one of the elderly one day. And I think they're one of the populations, that they're extremely vulnerable, but I don't think they get the dues and the kudos and the respect and the treatment that they all deserve. And so I think when I think about my ESG travels, right, maybe I'll use an example. I think about my career. I worked in Big Four consulting, worked in IT, worked in real estate, private equity, mining, education, and healthcare. So these are my industries. I've probably done a few more. I think in my heart, the time that I had working in sustainability in the aged care sector can bring me to tears in 2 seconds in a positive way. The other industries, I don't think I'll ever cry. It was lovely, but when you work in the aged care sector, there's an emotive element to it. You see pretty much every generation in the home. Grandkids coming and visiting, parents, grandparents. You see all generations in one place, and obviously aging population happening in Australia and many other parts of the world. So ESG is not just about decarbonization, net zero, energy. Like you rightly said, Mark, you got biophilic design, but ESG, forget about the term ESG, CSR, sustainability. Let's assume the alphabet soup and the acronym salad does not exist. What we're trying to do is to, uh, what is the definition of sustainability? It says, enjoy our time on this planet without compromising the ability of future generations to enjoy their time on this planet as well. The elderly have paid their dues, so they're now here in this place, and you want to make it as amazing as possible an experience before they kind of go into their next chapter. And so I think ESG and aged care isn't as interconnected at the moment as ESG is with some other industries, maybe because there's a more easy understanding of the E, the environment. But I think people who want to work in the aged care sector and in ESG and or sustainability, think about the S, think about the social, and from practitioner point of view, that's where most practitioners are lacking on the social skills, social SME related skills. So do a couple of courses, understand what S actually means, and then think through, okay, so then under S you have human rights, modern slavery, well-being, health and safety, all these different things, and then see if you can go into aged care and make an impact on the S, bit of the E, and have the G really, really solid. And I think from a legacy point of view, um, it's amazing. And I still hear stories from some of the aged care homes at Regis, from some of the different homes, and they keep sending me photos of residents doing something around sustainability. So that's enough for me to keep me going for a while.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kaushik, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the episode. I can't believe it's been this long since we've last spoken. It's been quite a bit of time in between drinks. So I look forward to catching up and also reading a book. You kept that quiet. You're a best-selling author on Amazon, so congratulations. The Art of
Thank you,
Winning.
buddy.
I will have a link in the comments for our viewers to purchase this. But thank you so much.
I just want to add one thing. Could I
Sure.
just add one last thing, Mark? I would say, you just said we actually haven't seen each other since 2019, I think. So it's been about 5 years. For me, the definition of, because I see humanity moving in a certain direction, for me, even if I haven't seen someone in 5 years or 10 years, but if they're a true friend or something, there's something there, a bond, it's like you never, missed a beat. And I think when you reached out and when we had our first chat today, it's like 2019 all over again. And so that means a lot to me. So thank you.
No, thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And I look forward to continuing the conversation and seeing how things develop. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thanks. Take care.